Alcohol can be damaging to our own health, but as we've been hearing this morning, the effects on the children of alcoholics can be devastating.
Well, let's talk now to two people who have direct experience of this problem. Joe Huey, whose father was an alcoholic, and Todd Sullivan, who's also had an alcoholic parent and now works in the sector. Good morning to you both. Nice to see you. When we look at this, Joe, just explain your situation, because we're hearing the statistics and they're frankly quite staggering, aren't they? But just tell us what happened to you.
So my father was an alcoholic, and ever since I was as young as I can remember, he was a drinker, and the home environment was very difficult in terms of not knowing what he was going to say, how he was going to react and behave. Very common is this living on eggshells. You don't know what they're going to do, what they're going to say. I remember waiting for him to come home from work, and I was so excited, hoping that, you know, he would be pleased to see me. But you never really knew what mood he was going to be in. And so he'd come through the door, and it's a case of telling, right, is he in a good mood, isn't he? And do I need to back off, or, you know, is this going to be received, you know, in a good way? And so that creates a sense of anxiety, because you're living on these eggshells and you don't know what to do. And for me, it was a very emotionally and physically abusive home. There was a lot of loneliness for me, and I felt very disconnected. I didn't feel understood, and I certainly didn't have a good relationship with my dad, because he was very absent, because he spent quite a lot of his time drinking. He was sat in his car. He'd be sat in his bedroom. He wouldn't join us for dinner, for breakfast, anything like that. He would very much separate himself off.
One of the statistics we're looking at from this parliamentary report into parental alcohol misuse is showing that 1/3 of child deaths and serious injuries in England have been caused by neglect by parents who are drinking. Did you ever get to that point, a serious injury?
No, for me, it didn't ever get as far as an A&E room or GPs or anything like that, because everything in a home of addiction is all very secret. So I would guess that those figures are probably low, because probably a lot of it isn't reported.
But Todd, I mean, the impact of this, what Joe has been describing, that will lead into adult life as well. There are issues you have to deal with in terms of that. So it's not just what's happening to the children now that is of concern. It's how it impacts society moving forwards.
Absolutely, and as Joe described, it doesn't have to be a very kind of dramatic, obvious situation in a home where you'd expect services to get involved. I mean, my father was very high functioning, so actually we would never have been involved in any services. People wouldn't have had those concerns. But actually, although my experiences were different to Joe, that, you know, the feelings and the reactions and responses I have to things have carried on the right way through my life, and so understanding that is a huge thing.
How difficult is it to identify these problems? Because I imagine within a family unit, it's difficult to speak out. Where would you go for help? Where would you identify that your case is a problem and therefore you can seek help?
It's really, really difficult, because actually you've got two issues. One is, if I'm a child, I don't want to tell people that my parent is doing something wrong. We feel that our childhoods are normal, whoever we are. And so you don't want to kind of be telling tales. But at the same time, you also don't necessarily think that your family's any different to other people. So that's where I think that the lived experience voice, hearing from people like Joe and other people, what they've experienced and what they've had, is so powerful, because you can realise you're not alone.
And Joe, what difference has this made for you in adult life? I mean, Naga touching on some of those things that you'll now carry with you, but how does it manifest itself for you?
In so many ways. I mean, living in a home of addiction is complex. So there's things like you become overly responsible, because obviously you're having to help out in the home and do things that you wouldn't normally have to do if you had two sort of good role model parents. You can develop anxiety. PTSD actually is very undiagnosed, I think, and it can affect you again into your adult life. Depression, loneliness, the list sort of goes on. Being afraid of figures of authority, very black and white thinking, things like that.
So Todd, we're talking about this now. What needs to be done? Because it's all very well the report identifying these issues. So,
to me, I think it's about giving as many safe opportunities for people who've had this lived experience to share it, because that will make people feel less alone and less afraid to come forward. And then I think it's about having, in individual areas, strategies for dealing with it. and recognise that each individual area is very different. So a town is going to be very different on the coast to one that's a big city in the centre of the country, different communities and things like that. So I think that's the vital thing, is to appreciate each community is different, but my belief is always that inside each person, each community is what they need to heal themselves. They know. We just need to ask what those questions are to find what that is.
Keep probing. Joe, Todd, thank you very, very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much. Let's take a look at what the weather's doing.